US President Donald Trump has signaled he is not yet ready to deliver US-made Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine during a meeting with Volodymyr Zelenskyy at the White House. The Ukrainian president came to Washington seeking access to the long-range weapons. While Trump didn't commit, he also did not rule out providing them at a later date.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy is back in the US, looking to strike a new weapons deal. His spat earlier this year with President Donald Trump, apparently water under the bridge.
I think it looks beautiful in his jacket. Yeah. Is it beautiful?
But Zelenskyy didn't come for compliments. He was hoping to secure Tomahawk long-range missiles from Washington.
We don't have Tomahawks. That's why we need Tomahawks. But the United States is a very strong production. And the United States has Tomahawks and other missiles, very strong missiles. But they can have our thousands of drones. That's why where we can work together, where we can strengthen American production.
Trump, however, seems reluctant about providing these weapons to Ukraine, stating that they are needed in the US. Instead, he's been portraying himself as a mediator. And after his success in the Middle East, Trump now hopes to broker peace between Russia and Ukraine.
Look, my only statement is we have to get together. It's a very small group of people. It's the president, and the president. Okay, 3 presidents. And I'm the mediator president. And I'm mediating not an easy situation. It should be easy, but it's a lot easier when people understand each other, when they get together, and when they like each other. We don't necessarily have that situation as far as like is concerned.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban has repeatedly offered to host a summit, but the international arrest warrant for Putin and the location itself are both obstacles to a meeting there. In 1994, Russia guaranteed Ukraine's sovereignty in Budapest in exchange for Ukraine handing over its nuclear weapons. For many Ukrainians, the Hungarian capital represents a litany of broken promises. And Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov appears to be sending mixed messages about the urgency for talks between Russia and the US.
The meeting could indeed take place within 2 weeks, or slightly later. Both sides agree it should not be put off.
Following his meeting with Zelenskyy on Friday, Trump wrote on social media that Russia and Ukraine should make a deal and stop where they are, with Moscow keeping the territory it's taken from Kyiv. Meanwhile, Zelenskyy returned to Ukraine without Tomahawks, and with Trump hoping the two sides can bury the hatchet.
Let's now bring in Frank Ledwidge. He's a senior lecturer in strategic studies at Portsmouth University and a former UK military intelligence officer. Frank, good to have you with us. Let's start with those Tomahawks. They can fly long distance, deep into Russian territory, twice the distance that's between Kyiv and Moscow. But would these missiles be the game changer for Ukraine on the battlefield?
Good morning, Monica. No, absolutely not. They're just another weapon system. The significance, though, you did point out there, and that's their long range. So it brings a lot more targets within range. The difficulty for the Ukrainians is they're very unlikely to get any kind of number sufficient to make a real difference, even behind the lines or at that sort of strategic depth. Certainly won't make any difference on the battlefield. And that's where the center of gravity of this war is. So in summary, they won't get enough of them, and they won't immediately affect the battlefield at this stage.
So if they don't get enough of them, but could they perhaps, Ukraine, could they find specific targets in Russia where Russia is particularly vulnerable, where it could somehow at least make a difference?
Well, yes, they'll make a difference, that's for sure. You know, these are formidable weapons, but let's not forget that all they are is a bomb on the end of a rocket, about a half-ton bomb, much like a Storm Shadow or other weapon systems. But as we've said, the key here is range. So thousands of targets will be brought into range. But let's just put this into context. The Americans fired 60 cruise missiles at a research center in Damascus on one day in 2018. To destroy it. It fired another 60 on a Syrian airbase, and that was back in service in a few weeks. So in other words, you need an awful lot of these to make a difference, a real difference, even for one important target, and that's before you get into the defensive systems. So yes, they'll bring a lot more targets in. Certainly one of those targets would include drone production facilities, yes, fuel production facilities, refineries, research centers, and that kind of thing, and will be a threat. But they're not, in my view, a game changer in the way that most people seem to think, or many people seem to think they are.
But certainly Russia or Vladimir Putin isn't keen on the US supplying Ukraine with Tomahawk. He says it's an entirely new, qualitatively different escalation in US-Russia relations. Is Russia afraid of Ukraine actually getting Tomahawks?
Yeah, that's a slightly different calculation. And the point here is, I think, in summary, twofold. First, these Tomahawks are or will require extensive and obviously require extensive US support, both for the firing and, more importantly, the targeting deep within Russia. It's a very complex process, the targeting, and all the planning that's required for that. And Americans will need to be involved. So it brings the Americans directly in, and that's very significant, obviously, and of course could open doors to other US involvement. So, and there's also the slightly more opaque, but for the Russians, I think, very significant aspect that these missiles can, in theory, and indeed do in practice, or can be armed with nuclear weapons, which engages some of their doctrine. So for those two essentially political reasons, although the first one is really rather important, that is American involvement, it really does represent a risk to the Russians. But as weapon systems themselves, they're just long-range bombs. It's the US involvement and the potential these weapons have for nuclear warheads that bother the Russians, at least rhetorically.
All right, military analyst Frank Ledwidge there. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Monica.
We're joined now by DW Russian Affairs analyst Konstantin Eggert in Vilnius. Konstantin, so Volodymyr Zelenskyy leaving empty-handed. Why is that?
Well, I wouldn't put it that dramatically. I do not think we could have expected that Zelenskyy will get promises of Tomahawk deliveries before the summit with Putin. Definitely, Trump wants to keep this sort of prize dangling in front of Zelenskyy and also to keep it as a potential threat and leverage if his negotiations with Putin do take part, because we still don't know. It's very clear, though, that he really wants to see this picture of him sitting together with Putin and Zelenskyy and becoming this sort of a global peacemaker, if you wish. But as we know, this administration is quite unpredictable, sometimes deliberately. So let us wait and see what happens, and let us see if this summit between Trump and Putin really happens in Budapest or elsewhere, for that matter.
As you mentioned that, Budapest, what about that place? We already heard in the report that there are some tainted memories connected to Budapest, certainly for the Ukrainian people. Also, it's in the European Union, so Putin would have to be arrested there. Can you fill us in on all that?
Well, before he gets arrested or not arrested in Budapest, which is indeed a capital of a European Union and NATO country, Putin has to get there, and this is quite a trick, frankly speaking, because we've seen, if you look at the map, there are not many routes that do not lead via NATO and EU airspace. And even if he wants to fly all across the Black Sea, Turkey, and then via the Adriatic to Budapest, across the airspace of Montenegro, it is still a NATO country. So even getting there is a problem. Second, I don't think it's so much an issue of symbolism, than an issue of Zelenskyy just not being ready to sit down with Putin while the missiles are raining down on Ukrainian cities. I mean, for Zelenskyy, that would be, I wouldn't say political suicide, but that would really create a very difficult political situation for him, because Putin will try to use it, will try to exploit it and leave Zelenskyy empty-handed. Then it would be that he went to Budapest for nothing. So I think there is quite a bit of an issue with Zelenskyy going there. As for Putin, I think that his goal is essentially to protract his interaction with the United States as long as possible, as long as Trump wants to believe that he can get some deal out of all this. And I think this is going to be Putin's tactic anyway.
Well, it certainly would be the first time the two presidents of Russia and Ukraine would meet face-to-face since the start of the war. Be interesting to see if that is actually going to happen. DW Russian Affairs analyst Konstantin Eggert in Vilnius. Thank you so much.